Hello everyone, welcome to this week's Harbour Midweek Mini. I hope you're well. Thanks for joining me today. This is the first midweek mini for over the last couple of weeks. I'm sorry about that. Things have been very hectic. But what I wanted to do this week and in the coming weeks is to spend a bit of time looking at the Beatitudes of Jesus. I'm sure you've heard of those. They are a series of sayings from Jesus, found in Matthew 5, that form part of a bigger teaching of Jesus, which was or is known as the Sermon on the Mount. And in fact, I would argue that these statements that Jesus makes are very foundational to his whole ministry and his whole teaching. And we're going to hopefully come to understand why as we go through each one. In terms of when Jesus spoke these, we know, or where he spoke these, we know it was at the beginning of his ministry. And we know in Matthew 4, the chapter preceding Matthew 5, that he was in Galilee. And there's no real reason to think that he wasn't in Galilee in Matthew 5. And we're told in verse 1 that he went up onto a mountainside and sat down and began to teach his disciples. And it's a matter of debate which mountain he went up. We don't know, if truth be told. It may have been Mount Eremos, which is on the northwestern side of the Sea of Galilee. That's also known as the Mount of Beatitudes, but in truth we don't know. But he was probably nearby to the Sea of Galilee. And in my view, these words of Jesus are perhaps the most beautiful, or some of the most beautiful words that Jesus spoke. There's this sort of incredible simplicity about them, but you're also left with this feeling that something profound has just been said. And perhaps they're some of the most important words that Jesus spoke. And they are certainly shocking words. You can't sort of read them and not be affected by them. They're shocking, they're countercultural, and not just then but now. There's this sort of wonderful timelessness about these statements that Jesus made. And what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at those, and I'm going to be talking a bit about those. But although, you know, I'm going to verbalise something about them, in some ways they're statements to be sort of pondered on and meditated upon and thought about, and just to let those words sink into our spirits, I think is really, really good. So here they are. These are the words Jesus spoke. I'll read from verse 1, Matthew 5. Now when Jesus saw the crowd, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." So, to begin with, it's generally accepted that there are 8 Beatitudes. If you Google it, it will say there were 8 Beatitudes. But I'm going to be a little bit controversial and suggest that there were 9 Beatitudes. And I'm saying that because I reckon that verse 10 and verse 11 represent 2 Beatitudes. But more on that in a minute. The only other thing worth saying at the outset, perhaps, is that there is another version of the Beatitudes in Luke 6. And there we find there are just 4 Beatitudes. And they are, however, mixed with 4 woes. So there's 4 Beatitudes and 4 woes. So it's a sort of a slight remix of Matthew 5. That said, although they're only written about in 2 places, I can't help feeling that Jesus would have spoken these many times. And we don't know that, of course, but it just feels like they are so foundational to what Jesus was about and the message that Jesus sought to bring to the world. But what we're going to do today, just very quickly, And briefly, we're going to look at this word that really stands out when you read the Beatitudes, and it's this word blessed. And we really need to understand what Jesus was meaning here when he said blessed, as it's a word that as Christians we're so familiar with, and perhaps we don't even think about what it really means. But I just want to look at what it means in this context and in this passage. And Jesus actually says it 9 times. And the same word is used every time when Jesus speaks it out. And in the text it's this word makarioi. And it comes from this Greek word makarios, which you may have heard of. And that word itself is it's a prolonged version of this word for happy in ancient Greek, makar. And if you like, the word is really operating as a sort of superlative, that it's not just happy, it's like really happy. It was a well-known word in the ancient world, in ancient Greek world, and all through the time in which Jesus lived, of course. And in ancient Greek, it was often used to speak of the gods. The gods were described with this word makarios, that they were happy, that they were blessed. And in fact, when people died, the dead were spoken of as blessed, the makarios, and they'd gone to this better place, a place of peace, and that's how they were referred to. But also, interestingly, the elite of society, of Greek society, were described as blessed, as happy, makarios. And those who were living in comfort, those who had land, those who had property, those who had ease in their life were considered to be blessed. And I'd sort of can't help feeling that this probably, or this group, or this sort of cultural idea was the idea that Jesus was really getting at when he spoke out his Beatitudes. And in these 9 statements, he's redefining what true blessedness is really all about, and that it doesn't belong to the rich and the comfortable, but rather to the poor and the hungry and the lowly, and those who mourn, and those who even suffer persecution are the ones Jesus describes as blessed and pronounces over as blessed. And our big challenge really is to understand why that is. Why do these things that seem sort of negative and hard and difficult constitute or represent the source of blessedness, the source of happiness? And that's what we're going to try and get to the bottom of in the next few weeks. The other thing to say about this idea of blessedness and these declarations of blessedness that Jesus made is that Jesus wasn't really the first to come up with this sort of way of talking, and it's something that we find in the Proverbs and in the book of Psalms in particular, but elsewhere in the Old Testament too. There are lots of these little expressions concerning who is blessed and why people are blessed. In the book of Proverbs, there's loads of them. Proverbs 14 verse 21 says, "Blessed is the one kind to the needy." And Proverbs 28:14, another example, "Blessed is the one who trembles before God." And perhaps most famously, a psalm we all are probably familiar with, Psalm 1, it says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers." So these little sort of sayings concerning blessedness were found throughout the Old Testament. And in fact, interestingly, just as an aside, in Psalm 1 there, the word, because obviously Psalm 1 was written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew word for blessed there is asher. But when it was translated into Greek, this Hebrew word, for example in the Greek Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament, the word asher was translated with R into that word we've already come across, makarios. So this same idea is sort of caught up. The makarios really represents something of this Hebrew idea of blessedness or happiness. So these pronouncements, if you like, these declarations of blessedness were an important part of the Old Testament and the Old Testament poetry and wisdom books especially. And they were pointing out what constitutes the state of happiness? Or put another way, what the source of happiness in life is, where happiness can be found. And I think that's it's a big question. It's one of those first order questions, one of those, questions, existential questions, if you like, that maybe some of us have spent time thinking about at some point in our lives. What is the secret of happiness? What can make me happy? What will make me happy? What is true happiness? And I think that's what Jesus is getting at here. He's sort of digging away and unpacking, not just in the Beatitudes, but in the whole of his Sermon on the Mount. He's trying to get to the bottom of what is it that makes human beings truly happy, and how do they find it? What does it look like? How do they possess it? And what's surprising is that the sort of things that Jesus is presenting as being the source of happiness are not what we would expect, not what anyone would have expected. And that's really what we're going to be considering. Why did Jesus say that these particular things which sound not very nice, like being poor in spirit, why does that constitute a source of blessedness, of makarios? And that's the phrase we're going to be, the beatitude we're going to be looking at, first of all, next week. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And we're going to be trying to get to the bottom of why Jesus thought to be poor in spirit was a blessed thing, and why the kingdom of God belonged to those who are poor in spirit. So it's an interesting study, it's an interesting thing to consider, and I think we'll hopefully get a lot out of it. But maybe this week have a little think about that verse, meditate upon that verse, blessed are the poor in spirit, and see what the Holy Spirit brings to mind concerning that. Thanks for joining me. God bless you, and see you soon.